On this weather situation, in the past 30 days, we've shown a map here of some precip levels. This is percent of normal. Just wanted to point out, of course, we know about these rains here, which occurred in Minnesota, Iowa, and parts of Wisconsin as well. But also want to point out the fact that look at this here for portions of eastern Nebraska and certainly much of this eastern Corn Belt right here. We have seen some changes going on here, and a lot of customers have talked about some of these issues here. As far as this moisture, this is the short-term moisture index, which we've seen many times. Simply shows what we kind of have expected, the fact that western Corn Belt still has ample moisture. And we will point out there is some of this drier portions now showing up here in the southern part of the eastern Corn Belt. So keeping that in mind here. As far as the current forecast does show, we have dry temps, or I say dry weather coming about the next week, week and a half or so. So with that in mind, it's going to continue this problem we've had showing up here for really 4 weeks now here. So we'll kind of watch this closely here. One thing we've got to point out is, of course, a lot of our customers, as we're doing these yield surveys, and we're hearing more talk of actually harvest reports going on. So what's interesting here right now is we have two separate type of mindsets in this market. One, as we're saying, as we kind of saw here last week, reports of some people still saying with the 164 to 166 type of yield scenario, very close to what USDA had just a couple weeks ago. There are some that are starting to say maybe 160. So there's actually two very separate branches now starting to show up on these corn yield numbers. For right now, we still have to suggest this 165 or even 167 that we had plugged in for our report is still pretty close. The reason why we say that is even though we have dry conditions showing up and some people are complaining about it, we have certainly more guys are telling us, especially with these yield reports, that things are doing pretty darn well as far as those yield checks. So at this point, we're not going to lower our number yet any worse than what USDA has, this 165 level. So it is something we do respect that dry conditions have shown up, but kind of more or less from these crop reports, we're not going to get too aggressive on lowering our yield numbers here just yet. Another thing I want to point out as far as some of these demand issues we hear about, one of our guys, in fact, Brad talked to us today about one of his clients wanted to say, well, where is cash corn the break-even for these ethanol producers? At what level does cash corn need to rise up to before it turns unprofitable? And we saw that you're looking about 404, I believe it was the cash corn level before ethanol becomes unprofitable. This one is university data. This is only good through June, but our own models, which we do keep, suggest that, at least for right now, 404 is a cash price before ethanol becomes unprofitable. And if you figure in the fact that basis in a lot of areas is a little more than 30 cents or so, for most plants, this is still okay in terms of profitability levels here. I just want to point out, just kind of, most of our slides here on the grain section are all going to be on corn related. We all know that beans, no matter what type of yield or whatever you throw at them, still is a bearish scenario. I want to just kind of point out here as far as these ending stocks, we're going to look at this thing in terms of, is this 2010 level, these last numbers right here, these last bars, is this a tight crop yet? We'll kind of see why you have a different mindset going on right now. In the past few years, we've gone as low as this 800 and change on up to over 2 billion bushels. We just want to point out that this 1 billion mark is kind of like the magic number. USDA is at 1.3. Our number right here is, I believe, that we had in here, that 1.4. But what's more important about this is not just a plain stocks by themselves number, ending stocks. It's the stocks to usage, the true measure of tightness. In other words, take your usage, divide it by stocks. That measures how tight things are. Because as we know from the last few years, we have rising demand. Stocks to usage kind of paints a little different scenario here. We're actually almost as tight as this 2003 scenario we had just laid out here. So keep in mind, as far as stocks to usage, the true measure of tightness, we do have a kind of a tight scenario with this corn crop. At this point, with this yield at 165, this is not going to be a major problem yet. But any further clicking down on these yield numbers, that's certainly why this market